Roland, a British noblewoman who used to live in Switzerland, recently moved back to a three-story apartment in a moving building in London, UK. The upstairs of this house is the temporary residence of the famous detective Poirot. I don't know if Poirot, the god of death, is at fault. The day Roland moved into the new house, she died in her own house. And the murderer who murdered her almost killed Poirot's best friend, Constable Hastings. So what the hell is going on? Our story starts with a play. This evening, Poirot watched a murder-themed play with his best friend, Hastings. During the break, Poirot noticed two familiar figures in the audience. One of them was a girl with golden short hair, named Gincia. The other girl with long curly hair was a friend of Gincia who rented the house. Gincia and Gincia lived downstairs. Poirot wanted to go up and say hello to the two neighbors. But because the two were laughing with two men in nightgowns, Poirot didn't want to interrupt their conversation, so he took the initiative to withdraw. After the play ended, Hastings drove his new long-haired sports car and sent Poirot back to his residence. When the two first entered the house, they heard a sound coming from the garbage channel connected to the back door of the kitchen. This so-called garbage channel is a special passage for apartment residents to transport garbage. There is a small lift inside that requires manpower to pull, but it's late at night, so it's unlikely that someone would throw out garbage at this time. Poirot suspected that a thief used the lift to climb into the resident's house. In order to avoid alarm, Poirot hurriedly asked Hastings to turn off the lights in the house, then open the back door of the kitchen and look towards the garbage channel. As expected, he saw two suspicious men climbing the lift. Poirot lived on the 5th floor, and the two men quickly climbed into the room on the 3rd floor from the lift. Hastings saw this and was about to call the police, but was stopped by Poirot. Poirot thought the two people might not be thieves, because they were all wearing nightgowns. Who would wake up in a nightgown? Not long after, there was another noise in the corridor. It sounded like someone had found the body. Poirot was in a good mood at the time. He didn't expect to run into a murder at home. He opened the door of the house and followed the voice of Hastings to the stairs on the 4th floor to check the situation. There were 4 people discussing in the stairs at the time. These 4 people were not strangers. They were the ones Poirot met while watching the play: Hastings, his sister, and the 2 men in nightgowns. Poirot soon learned that the tall man's name was Gauger, a friend of Hastings, and the short man's name was Adouin, who was Hastings' childhood friend. The 2 men who had climbed into the room on the 3rd floor through the lift in the garbage channel earlier were Gauger and Adouin themselves. It was just that the light had been too dim at the time for Poirot to clearly see their faces. After learning about Poirot's identity as a detective, Adouin quickly confessed what had happened that night. It turned out that after the play, Gauger and Adouin had escorted Hastings and his sister back to their home. When they were about to open the door, Hastings discovered that the key he'd placed in his bag was missing, and his sister never carried the key whenever she went out with Hastings. Seeing that the two couldn't get inside, Gauger suggested he and Adouin climb through the lift in the garbage channel into the 4th floor room where Hastings and his sister lived, and then open the door from inside. While doing this, Gauger, who had just entered the house, noticed the room was dark and groped around in the kitchen to turn on the light. But the light wouldn't turn on due to a malfunction. Gauger had no choice but to go into the living room and switch on the main light there. Adouin, who followed him into the living room, noticed that the decor of the house looked very strange. It was clearly not the home of Hastings and his sister. Gauger then spotted a few letters on the dining table in the dining room. The address on the envelopes was for the 3rd floor of the apartment, and the recipient's name was Roland. Only at that moment did Gauger and Adouin realize they had entered the wrong house. As they were about to leave, Adouin noticed a pair of human legs under the curtain in the living room. When he opened the curtain, he was shocked to find a female corpse. The victim was a pregnant woman. In a panic, Adouin and Gauger fled the room, then found Hastings and his sister to explain what had happened. The 4 of them hadn't yet gone downstairs to call the police when they ran into Poirot. After hearing Adouin's account, Poirot immediately returned to his room and telephoned his old friend, Captain Cap. Then he took Hastings to Roland's flat and conducted a simple inspection of the scene. Poirot instantly recognized the victim as the new resident of the apartment, Roland. There were 5 letters on the dining table in Roland's home, but they were all ordinary advertisements, with nothing suspicious. Additionally, the kitchen light that Gauger had failed to switch on earlier was now working normally. It was presumed to have been a minor electrical fault. While Poirot was preparing to search the other rooms at the crime scene, a sudden whistle came from the guest room. Poirot carefully opened the door and saw the maid of the Roland family lying on the bed, breathing heavily. It seemed that the maid did not know her mistress was already dead. Poirot did not shatter the maid's illusion but quietly closed the guest room door. Finally, he asked Hastings to check with the apartment manager if there had been any suspicious people entering or leaving the building that day. Hastings had just left when Detective Caput arrived at the scene with his team and took over the investigation. Poirot was then invited to the residence of Jin Shaw and Ju Mei on the 4th floor for a late-night snack. Gauger and Hastings used the lift in the trash channel to help Jin Shaw and Ju Mei open the door to their home. During the meal, Jin Shaw provided Poirot with a suspicious clue. Recently, Jin Shaw and Ju Mei had been fascinated by dancing, often practicing to music inside their apartment. That afternoon, Roland had slipped a letter under their door, inviting Jin Shaw to meet at the coffee shop downstairs at 7 p.m. the next evening. He claimed he had something important to discuss. At first, Jin Shaw assumed that Roland, who lived on the 3rd floor, might have been bothered by their dancing and wanted to ask them to keep the noise down. But now, thinking it over, Jin Shaw realized that Roland's invitation didn't seem to be about noise complaints. The reason was simple: if it were just a trivial matter like that, there was no need for such a formal meeting in a coffee shop. Furthermore, Jin Shaw and Roland had never met before. How did Roland even know Jin Shaw's name? Poirot found this puzzling as well. While he was still considering this, Detective Caput called Poirot outside to update him on the police's findings. After a preliminary examination by the forensic team, it was determined that the victim, Roland, had died between 5 p.m. and 6 p.m. that afternoon. The cause of death was a close-range gunshot. The murderer had likely used a silencer, which explained why no other residents in the apartment heard anything. Furthermore, Roland had been shot in his own dining room. After the shooting, he collapsed onto the dining table, leaving a significant amount of blood on the tablecloth. However, because the tablecloth was red, the blood wasn't immediately noticeable. Afterward, the murderer moved the body under the living room window and concealed it with the curtains. Perhaps because of this, Roland's maid hadn't discovered the murder. It was said that the maid had gone out on personal business at 5 p.m. and returned at 10 p.m. Believing her mistress had already gone to bed, she didn't turn on the living room lights. As she passed through the dining room, she placed a letter, delivered earlier by the apartment manager, on the dining table and went back to her room to sleep. It wasn't until Detective Caput and his team inspected the scene that the maid was awakened and informed the police of the situation. After hearing Caput's report, Poirot was left even more puzzled. Why did the murderer hide the body under the living room curtain? If the murderer didn't want the maid to find the body and call the police, they should have chosen a more concealed spot to hide it. Caput was also puzzled. Additionally, the police had discovered that the deceased, Roland, had been living in Switzerland and had only recently returned to the UK. Yet, Caput had already arrested a suspect. He had found a handkerchief embroidered with the initials, JF, at the crime scene, as well as a letter in Roland's pocket. The letter read, "If it's convenient, I'll come to you at 6 o'clock tonight." What do you think? The name on the letter was Freeze. Caput suspected that the murderer was someone named Freeze. The handkerchief with the initials, JF, seemed to be a personal item that the murderer had dropped at the scene. The person's full name might be John Freeze. Based on this assumption, Caput instructed his team to investigate Roland's social circle to see if they could find someone with the last name, JF. In Caput's mind, the case's truth lay somewhere in the middle. However, Poirot thought Caput's conclusions were too hasty, based merely on a letter and a handkerchief. Just as the two were about to argue, Freeze himself arrived and shared some information he had heard. According to the apartment manager, aside from the apartment's residents, the only visitors to Roland's place were Freeze's 2 friends, Gauger and Adouin, and the postman who delivered letters to Roland. Gauger and Adouin often visited Freeze at the apartment, and the postman was very familiar with them. The postman had delivered a letter at 9 o'clock that evening, by which time Roland had already been seriously injured and dead. Clearly, the postman had no connection to the murder. After hearing Freeze's explanation, Poirot felt a sense of confusion. He then located Roland's maid and asked how many letters she had received for her mistress. The maid recalled this question with clarity. She said she had brought 6 letters for Roland. However, when Poirot had been inspecting the crime scene, he had seen only 5 letters on the dining table. So, who took the missing letter? Poirot was puzzled and decided to revisit the crime scene. This time, he specifically asked Freeze, Gouget, and a douane to accompany him to Roland's apartment. Soon, Poirot discovered a suspicious blue bottle in Roland's kitchen trash can. Due to a recent cold, Poirot's sense of smell wasn't very sharp, so he handed the bottle to Gouget and asked her to sniff it and identify the smell. As soon as Gouget opened the cap, she immediately felt lightheaded and dizzy. Poirot was shocked and asked a douane to go to the living room and pour a glass of wine for Gouget to drink. After drinking the wine, Gouget felt slightly better but was still a bit confused. Poirot then asked Freeze to help Gouget go to Roland's house to rest. After they left, a douane asked Poirot what to do next. Poirot, with a smug expression, replied that they didn't have to do anything because the murderer had already been revealed. Seeing a douane's confused face, Poirot explained that the murderer who shot Roland was none other than Gouget, the one who had found the body with a douane. The blue bottle that Gouget had just smelled was actually an anesthetic that Poirot had secretly placed in the trash can earlier. It was volatile and easy to evaporate. After Gouget inhaled the anesthetic, Poirot took 2 items from her while a douane was pouring wine in the living room. One was the key to Freeze's house, which she had stolen, and the other was the letter from Roland's dining table. These 2 items had been taken by Gouget. She stole Freeze's house key to ensure she could leave the house. She and a douane had used the elevator to open the door for Freeze and his sister, then pretended to enter the wrong room. They ended up in Roland's kitchen on the 3rd floor. To avoid a douane realizing that they had entered the wrong room, Gouget quickly returned to the trash can. Gouget also lied about not being able to turn on the kitchen light, so she walked into Roland's living room and turned on the main light. Her goal was to steal a letter that was damaging to her, but also to deliberately discover the body with a douane to lower her own suspicion. Gouget had shot Roland around 5 o'clock that evening and then gone to watch a play. The reason she didn't take the letter earlier was that it hadn't reached Roland's hands yet. So, Gouget had to return to the scene and retrieve the letter. After hearing Poirot's analysis, a douane was completely confused. He didn't understand why Gouget would kill Roland, a person she didn't even know. As Poirot was about to explain the motive behind Gouget's murder of Roland, they heard Freeze shouting upstairs, "Gouget ran away. Gouget ran away." It turned out that after Freeze had woken up and realized the key and letter on him were no longer there, he immediately suspected his identity had been exposed. He grabbed Freeze's car key and attempted to escape in Freeze's newly bought racing car. Upon hearing Freeze's shout, Freeze and a douane, who had been guarding the corridor, chased him downstairs. At this point, Gouget had already started the car. Seeing her prized new car, she was about to drive away when, ironically, Freeze rushed up and stopped in front of the car, preventing the murderer from escaping in the deadly vehicle. Fortunately, at the critical moment, Gouget subconsciously turned the steering wheel, avoiding Freeze and crashing into a power box on the side of the road. Freeze survived, but his new racing car was severely damaged and would likely need repairs. Whether he had insurance remains unknown. Gouget, who was injured, was caught by Freeze on the spot. Gouget had no choice but to admit his crime and the motive behind it. It turned out that Freeze, who lived on the 3rd floor of the apartment, was Gouget's wife. A few months ago, Gouget met Freeze, a British nobleman living locally. The two fell in love at first sight and quickly registered their marriage in Switzerland. However, Gouget fell out of love with Freeze and called him many times to ask for a divorce. But Freeze not only refused the divorce but also threatened to expose Gouget's identity and whereabouts. Gouget did not take his wife's threats seriously. In his opinion, since their marriage was registered in Switzerland, being married to Freeze in the UK wasn't a major issue. What Gauget didn't expect was that Freeze was so in love with him that he moved back to the UK and rented a place downstairs from Gauget's apartment. Only then did Gauget realize he was in deep trouble. Around 5:30 p.m. that afternoon, Gauget went to Freeze's place, begging him not to have an affair. However, Freeze rejected him and even consulted a lawyer friend, stating that their marriage was legally protected in the UK. The lawyer had sent their Swiss marriage certificate to London, which Freeze had received that evening. Freeze arranged to meet Gauget at a cafe at 7 p.m. the following night to show him the document and expose Gauget's deceitful behavior. Furious, Gauget decided to kill Freeze. He used a gun with a silencer to shoot his wife. Gauget knew that Freeze's maid would be out until 10 p.m. When she returned, he planned to retrieve the marriage certificate from her. After shooting Freeze, Gauget hid the body under the living room curtain, thinking the maid would never discover it. Gauget then left the apartment to watch a play with Freeze and others. Upon returning from the play, Gauget pretended to have entered the wrong room, entering Freeze's living room. He deliberately opened the curtains to make sure Freeze would find the body. While Freeze was distracted by the discovery, Gauget took the letter containing the marriage certificate from the dining table. To mislead the investigation, Gauget left behind a handkerchief embroidered with JF, and a letter addressed to Freeze at the scene, intending to frame a non-existent person named Freeze for the crime. What Gauget didn't expect, however, was that the murder happened directly below the apartment where Detective Poirot was staying. Poirot quickly got involved in the investigation and uncovered Gauget's scheme. In the end, Gauget was taken away by the police. Freeze watched as his husband was escorted into the police car, a soulful expression on his face. Poirot, taking the opportunity, comforted Freeze. It turned out that Poirot had long suspected that Freeze had feelings for him. However, due to Freeze's shy and reserved nature, he never confessed his feelings. Gauget, however, had intercepted that opportunity. Under Poirot's comfort, Freeze's mood improved significantly.